Nozzles. What even are they? Well, it turns out you need them to print with, so that answers that. I started this video with the expectation that I'd test out some nozzles, some cheap ones and some expensive ones, and I would see if the price affected the quality of the print. I'll explain at the end of the video why this isn't going to be the case, at least in this episode, and why I'm doing it in the next episode, but for this one, I'm going to try to show you some really spectacular things I found along the way. So it might be a slight change of pace compared to usual. You can comment below on what you think of that. I think you will enjoy it though, so have a seat, let's go. This video is sponsored by PCBWay. I took this photo and I posted it on YouTube while I was working on this video because I thought it was a hilarious joke, but in some ways this is not hilarious. The vast majority of these nozzles that you see on this table here, well, there's two problems with them. The first is they don't fit. When I started 3D printing in 2019, and that is 5 years ago now, it doesn't feel like it. When I started there were two standards for nozzles, unless you were using printers a bit more exotic. Well, okay, 2.5 standards for nozzles. There was the E3D V6 nozzle and the Creality Mark 8 nozzle. The half was a volcano nozzle, which is just an E3D V6 with a longer thread. And they did do a super volcano, but nobody used that. The issue is, and this will be an issue for the next two videos I'm making, the issue is that none of my current printers support these two standards anymore. I will of course solve it, but this is a really sad turn of events in my opinion, because we now find ourselves with way more proprietary nozzles, and mostly that affects price and availability. And I'll talk more about availability in the future episode. The second problem though is perhaps what led to the first problem. Most of these nozzles are cheap. They're dirt cheap. This bag of nozzles here was probably about £7, and this one probably about £7, and it comes in a plastic case. You can get hardened nozzles, steel ones for a couple of pounds more, or maybe even less. They're all so insanely cheap. When you contrast that to the price of this tin of E3D nozzles that I actually bought for this video for £32 for 6 nozzles, and if you buy these nozzles singly, well, they're not cheap. I don't know if you'd get any manufacturer to outright admit it, but if your core business was making nozzles, then you would probably be very tempted to make them harder to copy by modifying the size away from a standard, wouldn't you? But there have been other market pressures that have caused nozzles to change. One of those, of course, being the demands for increased flow rate, which requires a different shape nozzle, a different length nozzle. Anyway, using my microscope, I can take some pictures of nozzles from the top down. And don't tune out yet, because it is going to get so much better than the images you see on screen now. But they're just part of the narrative. We have to go down this road, so let's have a look at those. This is a photo of a nozzle taken with a camera. It's pretty okay, I guess. It's probably what you'd get if you took a picture yourself, and if you have a phone with a half-decent camera, you probably get a picture like this. You can see the nozzle, and you can see that it is a nozzle, but you can't really see the nozzle. When you get closer to objects that you're photographing, you have to choose. I can show you this bit of the nozzle, or I can show you this bit of the nozzle. And when you get a lot closer, this problem becomes worse. And what I'm describing here is a thing that photographers fully understand, and I've been a photographer for far longer than I've been a 3D printing enthusiast, so this is second nature to people like myself. This is something called depth of field, and it's the maximum distance that you can have in focus at any one time. And this is how camera optics work. It's how the world works. The point being that when you get a lot closer still, this problem becomes untenable. But there is a solution. There is a technique known to people who know the technique that is known, where you take a number of images of the object, think of it like slicing, and then in a piece of software you stack the images together afterwards, and you take the parts that are in focus and you create a whole image. This is imaginatively called stacking. Stacking images of a nozzle means you can see more areas in focus at one time. This looks a lot cooler, as you can see, but when we have pictures from the microscope, like earlier, where you can see the actual nozzle, the opening, why do we care? Well, if we want to qualitatively assess the build quality of a nozzle, there's several ways to do this. You can just image the hole with a microscope, as I did before, and this can work, and I've seen E3D share pictures like this, and that's how they do their quality control. And if you do get it right, you can get a good image of the actual roundness of the hole and the neatness of the hole, and whether there's any defects as a whole with a WH. You could probably even write a journal article on this, and maybe people would find it useful. And yes, more expensive nozzles do, generally speaking, have better shaped holes and neater holes. But that doesn't even nearly tell the whole story with an H, and it doesn't look very cool. So this is what a nozzle looks like when you stack images of it. I think you get a much better grasp of what the nozzle really looks like, and this helps you when it comes to talking about the quality. You can see the quality of the milling, on the outside at least. We can also stack at an angle, which you can't really do on a microscope, or rather, not with the setup of looking straight down into it. By the way, if you're wondering how I've got things set up to get these stacked images in the first place, it's actually quite a sophisticated process. You can learn about it on my second channel, and I will link to that below. Anyway, for fear of burying the lead, have you ever looked inside a nozzle? Like, really looked inside a nozzle? Like, really looked inside a nozzle? I find watching these stacks build is really fascinating. I'm using Helicon Focus to stack these images. I do recommend that software. This is not sponsored by them. I'll actually have to buy a license, which is a good time to probably mention that this episode and the next two will probably be the most expensive episodes I've ever made, just simply due to the amount of random hardware, nozzles, camera equipment, and even this software. That would not be possible without sponsorship and Patreon members, and I'm very appreciative of the support that both of those give that enables me to do this stuff. The channel would be a lot more boring without access to those resources. If you do enjoy this content and you want to help out with making this kind of thing, then even just making sure that you're subscribed will have an impact. The funny thing about focus stacking that I never really thought about before is that the software has to generate a depth map, meaning it has to know how far back each image is focused when it does the stacking. The side effect of it doing this is that the software has to know some things about the geometry of the thing you're photographing, and so you can do this. This gives us way more insight into the dimensionality of the defects with the nozzles. You can see on the cheap ender nozzle, for example, the bad tip is it's a 3-dimensional problem. And you can also see, although the software is not infallible, but the sides of the brass nozzles are so smooth that it confuses the generation of the model, and the parts you might think run up the side are only the very bottom parts, and there's a whole length of a brass nozzle that just reflects it's so smooth. But it's time for the ugly end of things. This nozzle is a hardened steel one. I don't know what the deal is with this nozzle, but it certainly doesn't look good. Comparing an E3D nozzle with a cheap one, you can also tell the difference. You might have noticed that I'm having some trouble lighting the back of these nozzles in some cases. I've covered the reasons why that's the case on the second channel and what I'm trying to do about it, but the TLDR version is a good segue to the video sponsor, which is PCBWay. PCBWay can make your custom PCBs, which is why I'm talking about this. I want to solve this problem by making a thin light source, and I mean very thin. And if you look at this decoration that they sent me as part of a Christmas present, they made this in-house, and this made me think that's what I need to do. I need a ring of LEDs so thin that it will fit around the macro lens. I know what you're thinking, that would be a ring light, but ring lights are too deep, and I want it to be exactly the right size, so I'm measuring it and I'm designing the PCB around the exact size that I want. This is something I'm planning to complete and get made before the next video, so stay tuned and hopefully I'll be able to show you that actually working. PCBWay can make the PCB exactly the shape and size that you want, just like the ring that I need, and they can do it in a variety of colours, like I'll probably go with black mask to cut down on stray reflections. It's pretty easy to order using the automated form, but help is a single click away via live chat if you need it. Don't forget that PCBWay also have other capabilities too, like CNC and 3D printing services. Check out the video description where you will find a promotion if you follow my link. Thank you PCBWay for sponsoring this video, and let's get back to it. So the interesting thing about Creality style nozzles, and these are the ones that we are seeing on the K1 and KE and CR10, these are the biggest surprise, I think, because the images show an incredible standard of finish internally. The Creality nozzles are also not expensive. So that makes you think that maybe you can make nozzles at a low price without compromising, and that is food for thought. Of course, if you want to guarantee consistency, you will find, as I did, that expensive nozzles like the Nozzle, that is actually the name, Nozzle, or E3D or Prusa ones, which I want to say are made by E3D because they look very similar under magnification. These expensive nozzles are definitely really consistent and very neatly made with good centered holes and no major burring on the inside. And this does, I suppose, lead us to a very difficult conversation. E3D's V6 nozzles and Volcano nozzles aren't nearly as easy to get hold of as cheap Amazon ones, and let's be honest, the E3D ones do seem a little too expensive. Bamboo nozzles and Prusa Mark IV nozzles are clearly very well made, but they're completely bespoke, and even more expensive. Creality and Sovel and Elegoo, they're all making their own nozzles, and they're not necessarily expensive, but it makes it a lot harder to get a bag of cheap nozzles or a bag of nozzles in multiple sizes for multiple printers at all, because they have to be sent to wherever you live from China. But on the flip side, are we getting better print quality because of this? Is the bespokeification of nozzles making it less likely that they will be commoditized and cheapified to the point where they become terrible? And yes, I did just make up 2 words, possibly even 3. The answer is, I simply don't know. I would like to know, and I would like to know if that's the case already, never mind for the future. And testing whether that's the case already is for next time. I felt that it would not do this video justice to just tag that onto the end and rush through it, and that's what I would need to do. And I'd also need to get the enders working so that I can put the ender nozzles in them, and I'd need a printer running a V6 nozzle, and that would be something like a Prusa with an adapter. I would need to run all these print tests in parallel somehow across all these nozzles, including the Prusa with its proper nozzle, and I'd want to get the Creality nozzles that I showed you in. They're on order and they haven't arrived yet. Somehow I also still have missing sizes and I need more nozzles, and I want to get that lighting sorted as well so I can get more pictures there. It's just too much to prepare for one video, and I didn't want to delay the episode, so we will just have to wait for that. And on that note, I will end. If you found this episode enjoyable, then put a comment below to let me know so that I know whether this sort of thing is worth doing again. If you didn't, then I guess let me know, but whatever, you can't win them all. I will see you next time. Thank you for watching.